Madam President, I rise today to speak on the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014, but before I make those comments, I want to associate myself with remarks of the gentlelady from California, Ms. Boxer, and also the gentleman from Rhode Island, Senator Jack Reed, and also all of those who voted to move forward where we continue to provide an economic social safety net for those people who have lost their job and are actively looking for work, and to continue this economic and social contract that's been part of the way Americans respond to help other Americans at a time when they're down, but they shouldn't feel like they're out. And I would hope that we could put party rancor aside, that we would look at common sense ways to move this bill forward. In terms of the so-called pay-fors, I've been here a long time. I've never seen this pay-for before on unemployment compensation, particularly for a 90-day bill. We're talking about 90 days, and we're already in the middle of January. So I hope the two leaders can come together and that we can resolve this. But on another topic, I want to report to the Senate some very good news. I rise today as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and I wish to announce that the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014 has completed all of its work in the committee process. We have completed our conference, and it has been filed in the House and should be considered in the House and Senate this week. What does that mean? Well, first of all, our Appropriations Committee has met the test of the Constitution. The Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution directs that there be an Appropriations Committee, though it's not referred to by name, but that it be every year that we review the annual spending of the federal government and vote upon it. We also follow the law, and by following the law is the Bipartisan Budget Act forged by the chairpeople of Ryan and Murray. We meet the requirements of the Budget Control Act. Now, the Budget Control Act looks at total spending for the federal government, mandatory spending, and then discretionary spending. We who are appropriators handle all of the accounts for discretionary spending. And guess what? The Budget Committee puts a cap on us. And that's great. It's a way that we actually have a cap on spending that everybody knows and everybody voted for. So we have a cap by law on discretionary spending of $1.012 trillion for fiscal 2014. Our work of our 12 committees stayed within that cap, and yet we spent the money to meet certain areas. We met compelling human need. We certainly preserved national security. We looked out for our human capital, particularly our children, in terms of education, and also invested in physical capital, improving infrastructure, and also the long-range needs of our country by putting public investments into important research and development, like $1 billion more in NIH. We also met the mandate of the American people, who told us, work together, be bipartisan, work across the aisle, and work across the dome. And you know what? We did it. And they also said when the bill comes up, don't do it with brinkmanship and don't do it with showmanship. Get the job done in a common sense way that promotes growth in our country, but yet at the same time looks at reducing debt. They said, don't do showdown politics, and we won't. We will pass it because we've met our deadline. They said, don't put government on autopilot. was something called those continuing funding resolutions. We don't do that either. Every one of our 12 subcommittees are in this comprehensive bill. Now, we've dealt with difficult and divisive policy issues, but we did it with diligence and determination, and I must add, we tried to promote an atmosphere of civility as we did it. It was tense, you betcha, and it was intense. But at the end of the day, we did more pinpointing of how to do the job than finger pointing at each other. Negotiations were, as I said, conducted that way. Our House Appropriations Committee Chairman, Mr. Hal Rogers, the gentleman from Kentucky, and I forged this agreement, along with ranking members, my Vice Chairman, Senator Shelby of Alabama, and in the House, Congresswoman Lowy of New York. We didn't do it alone. There was bipartisan agreement of all of the subcommittee chairs and over 50 members of the House and Senate. We met a very stringent deadline. When we left here on December 20th, we had to produce a bill by January 15th. That's tomorrow. That's when the continuing resolution expires. We're asking for a 72-hour extension, not to finish the job, but so that we can do our deliberations on the floor in both the House and in the Senate. We worked day and night. I joked and said during the deliberations, I wish I was as thin as I am stretched, because we really worked at it. Over the holidays, our staffs and our subcommittee chairmen worked. The only time they took off was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And also, so we want to thank each and every one of them for their dedication. As I said, this bill required very difficult choices. It meant give and take. And it meant more giving on both sides, because there were no big tanks. We worked under a very tight budget, $1 trillion. It sounds like a lot of money. And you know what? It is. But of the trillion, $600 billion was in the Department of Defense. $600 billion was in DOD. The other $3 billion was in discretionary spending for all of the domestic agencies. And then it comes out to like 620 and 380, but those are the rough numbers. So we did meet our national security needs, but we also were very mindful, and I was particularly mindful of the social contract with the American people. I wanted to have a bill that helped create jobs in this country, not make work, but real work, in rebuilding our physical infrastructure on roads and bridges and clean water. And I also wanted to look ahead to the long-range needs of our country in research and discoveries, and not only win the Nobel Prizes, but to win the markets. We expanded our commercial service office to help us promote exports overseas, accelerated manufacturing institutes where government could work with this new emerging dynamic small-scale manufacturing. I've lost over 12% of manufacturing in my state. So manufacturing is important. And we wanted to make sure that families felt they had a government that was on their side. First of all, helping with school safety. And we have a bipartisan program in here to promote school safety, but at the same time, to promote quality child care and early childhood education. We then made those kinds of investments, all with an eye on getting value for taxpayers. Our colleagues are very clear, and so are the American people. We have to have a more frugal eye, and I instructed my colleagues on the Senate side, let's look at those programs that are dated, duplicative, or dysfunctional. They get a D. Dated, duplicative, and dysfunctional. And we were able to eliminate many of them, and we'll be back at it next year doing a scrub. And if you notice, there's been no atmosphere of crisis. No atmosphere of crisis. The other thing that I'm proud of in this bill is that we avoided contentious policy riders. And I think we've been able to deal with those in a way where they will not be a problem for either side of the aisle. However, there was one wrong or one technical mistake in the Budget Committee that I'm proud that we were able to do. This was really at the very top of our agenda when Mr. Rogers and I met. We were deeply concerned about the cost of living issue related to military retirees of working age who were disabled or survivors. Their COLAs were mistakenly reduced by 1% in the recent budget agreement. This bill, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014, fixes that problem. It is limited in scope. It's limited to disabled military retirees and survivors of departed service members, the neediest of the needy. And we hope as time moves on, there is a presidential and a DOD commission on pension reform at DOD, and we'll have a comprehensive approach, and I do it. But I also want my colleagues to know we were very mindful of these veterans. So we did this fix for the military retirees of working age who are disabled or the survivors of departed service members. But we also did something else. If you go to the website in the House, which has the most detail because it's pending there, it'll come up in the Senate when it moves here tomorrow. We really put money into veterans' health care. We put money into fixing the veterans' disability backlog. I know the gentlelady from Massachusetts believes that if you're on the front line, you shouldn't have to wait to the back of the line to get, if you're a wounded warrior, to get your disability benefits determined. So we've pushed for those reforms, and we put the taxpayers' dollars behind it because we knew that's the way they would want us to spend their money. And we've also maintained the veterans' education benefit because many of our young men and women coming back home who served so well over there need to brush up on education here to move them to jobs here. So I hope in voting for this bill, people realize that it's a vote to support our most vulnerable patriots, to make sure we keep our promises to our veterans, and that we also then look at this comprehensive bill that we have moved ahead without rancor, without roar, and we've tried to, and we stayed within the parameters, the budget parameters given to us on a bipartisan agreement. So the House will consider this agreement this week. They've sent us over a 3-day extension so we could complete our work. I hope we pass it. I'd like it to pass tonight or certainly tomorrow. We'll be on the floor for ample debate on this bill, and I will look forward to answering questions. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, in this institution, often more gets said than done. But you know what? We did get it done, and I will have more to say about it when the bill comes to the floor. Madam President, I yield the floor.